The wind came down from the high mesas like a beast, dry and biting, dragging dust and broken prayers across the baked earth. In the first haze of dawn, the town of Dry Creek still slept under the weight of its own silence, except for the rattling of iron on wood and the quiet panic of a girl no older than 17. Miriam's fingers bled as she clawed at the lock on the wagon door. Her wrists were raw, bound by leather straps too tight for mercy. The sky was turning the color of old bruises, and the cold still clung to her skin. But she didn't stop, not even when her breath came out in gasps, not even when the wagon rocked with her desperation. She knew what waited beyond the sun. She'd heard the whispers in the wagon before hers. Girls from as far as Illinois and Virginia promised boarding houses or honest work. One of them, a red-haired woman with a wedding ring still on her finger, had bitten her own tongue before they reached the river. Too proud to scream, too broken to survive. Footsteps crunched across the gravel. Miriam froze, her hands trembling as the shadow of Sheriff Cal Mathis fell over the bars. He was chewing tobacco like always, spitting black juice into the dirt, eyes heavy-lidded and mean. His deputy, Harlan Teeth Bishop, stood behind him with a shotgun leaned across his shoulder and a grin like a wolf with a full belly. "She's trying again," Bishop drawled. Mathis said nothing at first, just stared at Miriam through the bars, like she was something he'd already paid for, something with no say in her own skin. Then he smiled, not wide, just enough to let her know the cost of her failure. "You break my lock again, girl," he said, "and I'll let Lucinda pick the first man who lays claim. You'd rather it be a gentleman, wouldn't you?" Miriam swallowed her cry. Her eyes dropped, but inside, something screamed. That scream echoed through Dry Creek every day, though most folks didn't hear it anymore. In 1887, Dry Creek sat on the edge of everything. Edge of Arizona, edge of law, edge of humanity. They called it a town, but it was little more than a patch of buildings sunk into dust. A saloon, a jail, 2 brothels, and a mercantile. The church had burned down 3 winters ago, and nobody built it back. Out here, women were a commodity. They came west with dreams, with husbands who vanished or with nothing at all. The town welcomed them with soft lies and hard hands. Some were sold straight into servitude, contracts forged by lawyers who never stepped foot west of St. Louis. Others were simply taken, promised shelter in exchange for work, then watched as the doors locked behind them and names were taken away. It was an old trick, made newer only by how little anyone cared. Sheriff Mathis, with his shiny badge and silver pocket watch, owned the law and the land. He ran the compound behind the livery, the boarding house, he called it. Fences 10 feet high. Men with rifles posted day and night. The girls were fed enough to stay pretty, beaten enough to stay scared, and paraded every Saturday night when the cattlemen came in from the hills. Folks outside Dry Creek said they didn't know. But the cattlemen knew. The traders knew. Even the circuit judges who passed through on occasion, sipping free whiskey in Lucinda Ray's parlor and pretending the girls weren't crying in the rooms upstairs. They all knew. And yet, life in Dry Creek went on. Children played in the alley behind the mercantile. Men drank on wooden porches, betting on dice, and pretending not to hear the screams at dusk. A town can get used to anything, if the money's right and the guilty sleep sound. But sometimes the wind changes. High on the bluff that overlooked the valley, a horse stood motionless, its rider watching the sun rise over Dry Creek. The dust hadn't reached him yet. The air was cleaner up there, still and sharp, like a blade before the strike. He didn't move when Mathis dragged Miriam from the wagon, didn't flinch when her bare feet scraped the gravel, or when Bishop slapped her hard enough to leave her dazed. From that height, they looked like insects circling a fire. The rider adjusted the brim of a battered hat. His face was in shadow. No one saw him, and yet if they had, they would have sworn later something about him didn't belong. Not outlaw, not lawman, just something waiting. Back below, the compound swallowed Miriam again. The gates clanged shut behind her, and with them, the last bit of morning light. Inside, Lucinda Ray stood in her usual spot by the mirror, rouge on her cheeks and a cigarette between her fingers. She watched the girl being hauled in like a sack of potatoes and clicked her tongue. Should have broken her legs the first time. she muttered. She once ran a saloon in Dodge, back before the sheriff pulled her from a noose and made her something worse. Now she painted over rot and smiled for drunks while selling girls like cattle. But even Lucinda feared the day one of them would not go quiet. That fear had a name once, Evelyn Rourke, the widow. She'd come to Dry Creek over a decade ago with a man she loved and a child in her belly. Her husband had stood up to Mathis when a girl was found strangled behind the post office. Next morning, he was found hanging from a mesquite tree. No trial, no witnesses. Evelyn vanished the same night. They said the desert took her. But folks in Dry Creek had started whispering again, not loud enough for Mathis to hear, but with eyes that shifted and spines that straightened when no one was looking. A wagon carrying 3 girls had broken loose near Raven Rock. A drunk miner claimed he saw a figure guide them into the canyon before the soldiers arrived. Another girl, beaten and left for dead, limped into a mission south of the border with a name stitched into her coat, *E. Rourke Star. It might have been nothing, but on this morning, as the wind picked up and the red sun climbed over the town that bought its women, the horses grew restless. A dry heat shimmered off the roofs, and in the jailhouse, Sheriff Mathis looked up from his whiskey and felt something strange in his chest. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the one holding the chains. He stood and walked to the window, scanned the hills, empty as always. But far away, on the horizon line, where the desert met the sky, something moved, slow and steady, like justice finally remembering the way. The sun had barely crested the hills when a black gelding trotted into Dry Creek, hooves muffled by the dust, but noticed all the same. The townsfolk watched from behind curtains and porch slats, squinting through the haze as the rider approached like a figure drawn from an old, half-forgotten tale. She rode slow and steady, no rush in her bones. The woman was tall in the saddle, wrapped in a long brown duster, weathered by years of sand and sun. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed her face, but the way she sat that horse, straight-backed, silent, told anyone watching she wasn't here by mistake. At her hip hung a worn rifle, the wood scratched and scarred. Across the saddle horn, a rolled-up blanket and a battered Bible bound with twine. The horse looked just as hardened as its rider, lean, scarred, and mean-eyed from a life on the trail. The gelding stopped in front of Jonas's general store. She dismounted with slow, deliberate motion, boots crunching against the ground. The air shifted around her, like the heat had started to pay attention. Jonas was behind the counter tying up a package of beans and flour when the bell above the door rang once, sharp and final. He looked up and dropped the string. For a breathless moment, the whole store seemed to freeze. Her shadow filled the doorway. She stepped inside, dust clinging to her coat, the brim of her hat still low. Her boots made no more sound than a whisper. Jonas stared wide-eyed. God Almighty! She looked up. Time hadn't been kind to Evelyn Rourke, but it had made her something greater than beautiful, something carved out of grit and grief. Wrinkles lined her face like riverbeds through a canyon, and her eyes, pale gray and quiet, carried the weight of too many years and too many nights spent in silence. They were eyes that had seen hell and come walking back. "Hello, Jonas," she said, voice sandpaper soft but clear. I thought you was," he trailed off, his mouth dry. "After what happened." Most did. She stepped forward, set a small pouch of coins on the counter, and reached into her duster. When her hand reemerged, it held a leather-bound ledger, weathered, stitched along the seams, and held closed by a rusted button. She placed it next to the pouch. "This belongs here." Jonas hesitated. Then, with trembling fingers, he opened the cover. Names. Dozens. Maybe more. Written in precise, slanted script. Dates beside each one. Some crossed out in red. Some underlined. Some circled. His hand hovered over one. Asterisk Sheriff Cal Mathis. May 2nd, 1877. Asterisk beneath it. Smaller script. Asterisk no trial. Rope borrowed from church steeple. Evelyn's watch stopped at 11:18. Asterisk. Jesus, Jonas whispered. "I'll be needing some coffee, oats, and 2 tins of salve," she said. "No questions." Jonas nodded without a word. When he looked back up, she was already outside, mounting the gelding again like she'd never stopped riding. By midday, the ledger's existence had crawled through town like a snake under floorboards. First to the saloon, where Gunnar Bell nursed his midday whiskey and heard it from a drifter. Then to Lucinda Ray, who sat at her powder table and dropped her mirror when the words Evelyn Rourke slipped through a girl's lips. Finally, to Harlan Bishop, who burst into the jailhouse with sweat pouring down his collar. "She's back," he told Mathis, voice cracking. "Swear to God, Cal, I saw her with my own eyes. Same damn coat, same scar down her hand. She ain't dead." Mathis leaned back in his chair, chewing slowly on the end of a cigar. He didn't speak for a long moment. "She's one woman," he said at last, though even his voice sounded thinner than usual. "She's that woman," Bishop hissed. "What if she talks? What if hell, what if she's got proof? She's got nothing but a name and a face folks half remember. That was 10 years ago. Who's gonna believe her now?" But the seed was planted, and men like Mathis knew how fast seeds could bloom into nooses. Out in the low hills west of town, Evelyn rode to an abandoned homestead, nothing more than a burnt-out cabin and a dry well. She unsaddled the gelding, set out water, and knelt beside a half-covered crate. From it, she drew 3 small bottles, a pouch of herbs, and a folded blanket. Then, with a steady hand, she loaded her rifle. A cough startled her. A boy, no older than 17, stood at the edge of the ruin. Thin, sunburned, his hat too big for his head. "You Evelyn Rourke?" he asked. She didn't nod, didn't deny it either. "My name's Caleb," he said. "My sister, Ruthie, she was took. 2 years passed. Lucinda Ray's got her up in the compound. Won't let her out. Says she owes room and board. She don't know nothing." She was 14. Evelyn rose slowly, studied him. He looked like someone who hadn't slept right in a year. Hope hanging off his shoulders like a threadbare coat. Evelyn handed him a wrapped bundle. "Take this to Sister Mercy down in Willow Creek. It's food, bandages, and a map. She knows what to do." Caleb blinked. "You ain't coming." "I will," she said, "when the time's right." "Why were you helping?" Her gaze moved to the horizon. Her voice came soft, like the wind before a storm. "Because no one helped me." She watched him ride off, then turned back toward town, unslinging the ledger from her saddlebag. That night, a page was added, * Ruthie James. Age 16. Held by Ray. Status, in progress, *. By morning, 4 women had vanished from Dry Creek. No one saw them leave. No one heard a hoofbeat, but the gates to Lucinda's compound had been left open, just wide enough for a shadow to pass through. The town was waking up to something it hadn't felt in years, unease. Lucinda Ray lit her 6th cigarette by noon, her fingers shaking. She stared at a locket in her palm, one she'd taken from Evelyn years ago. A photo inside. A man with kind eyes and a woman smiling beside him. A child not yet born. She closed the locket hard. Sheriff Mathis stood on the steps of the jail, watching the hills. For the first time in a decade, he wore his full belt and holster. Across the street, Jonas opened the ledger again. He turned a page and saw his own name written there. * Jonas Hargreave. May 5, 1877. Witness. Silent *. He shut the book, his hands trembling, and muttered a prayer. Out beyond the edge of town, Evelyn knelt in the sand beside a crude wooden cross. No name carved into it, just a rock at the base and a single silver button tied with twine. She placed her hand on the dirt. "Almost there," she whispered. Then she stood, turned toward Dry Creek, and began to walk. Not like someone returning, but like someone finally coming home. They found Annie behind the smokehouse at dawn, curled like a rag under the boards, face swollen, lips split, blood dried stiff on her temple. Lucinda Ray's men dragged her through the dirt by the arms, her feet scraping uselessly behind her. One of the newer girls, a dark-haired slip from Nebraska, screamed when she saw her and earned a backhand for the noise. No one helped. That's how it always was in Dry Creek. But that night, under a sliver-moon sky, someone slipped past the guards. Annie lay on a cot in the storage shed, barely conscious, ribs wrapped tight and one eye swollen shut. She heard the whisper of footsteps on the floorboards and tried to lift her head. A cool hand pressed her shoulder gently, firmly. "Sure, child. I've got you now." Evelyn worked by lantern light. Her hands were weathered but deft, mixing salve from crushed herbs, cutting cloth into narrow strips. She cleaned the wounds like someone who'd done it 1,000 times and never gotten used to it. Annie whimpered when the cloth touched her cheek, but Evelyn's voice soothed her. "You're brave. Braver than they know." The girl opened her good eye. You're the ghost. They said you were a ghost." Evelyn offered the ghost of a smile. "I've been called worse." When she finished, she pulled a tiny book from inside her duster and scribbled something in it. Notes, coordinates, a name. She handed Annie a tiny compass on a leather cord. "We're this close," she said. "When the storm comes, head west by night. There'll be a boy waiting, with a lantern just past Widow's Cut. You'll know him by the scar on his chin." Annie reached for her hand. "You're not going to leave me?" "I'll never leave you," Evelyn said. "Not really." By morning, Annie was gone, and the stories had begun to spread. They said a woman came in the dark, dressed like dust and smoke, healing the broken and leaving maps scrawled on torn pages. They said she knew the stars like they were friends and the canyons like they were corridors. One of the saloon girls swore she saw Evelyn vanish into the rocks with 5 women at her heels, only to find the trail wiped clean 10 minutes later. Sheriff Mathis kicked over his chair when he heard. He grabbed Bishop by the collar and slammed him into the wall. Six girls in 2 weeks gone. You useless bastard. You letting em fly out of their windows." Bishop stammered, drunk and trembling. "She's got help, Cal. It's not just her. They say she's got some kind of network. A whole damn system under our noses." Mathis narrowed his eyes. His gut had been churning since Evelyn returned, and now it burned with something hotter. Fear. Old, shameful fear he hadn't tasted since the night he watched her husband swing under a borrowed rope. "We cut the head off the snake," he said. "We find the one they love most, and we make her scream." 2 nights later, they took Miriam. She fought like a cat in a rain barrel, nails drawing blood, but they chained her to the post in the center of the square all the same. Bishop smirked as he lit a lantern and hung it beside her. "Come get her, ghost." He spat into the dirt. "Let's see what's left of you." Evelyn heard about it from a baker's wife, who left a ribbon by the trail, tied just so. She didn't speak when she read the message hidden beneath the rock. She only nodded, then packed her rifle, her Bible, and the last letter her husband had written before he died. She rode into town alone as the church bell rang midnight, the sound long disused and rusted from time. Dry Creek streets lay silent beneath the blood-colored sky, the dust swirling like smoke around her boots. Her shadow stretched across the square as she stepped from her horse and walked forward, rifle across her chest. Miriam lifted her head, eyes wide with tears. "You came," she whispered. Evelyn said nothing. She turned her gaze to the buildings flanking the square. "They're all here," she called into the night. "All the ones you tried to bury." And then, like ghosts from rooftops and doorways, the women appeared. One by one, they stepped from the dark, dozens of them. Faces half hidden by hats and scarves, eyes sharp and steady. Some held rifles. Some carried blades. Most just stood, silent as judgment. Mathis appeared at the jailhouse door, flanked by Bishop, Bell, and Lucinda Ray. They looked less like rulers now, more like hunted men watching the storm roll in. "You're outgunned," Mathis growled. "Ain't no jury in Arizona listen to whores and liars." Evelyn stepped forward, the rifle now resting easily in her hands. "You remember 1876?" she asked, voice carrying like thunder through the still. "Fort Whitley, Quartermaster's Corps. You remember the woman who mapped the southern desert routes for the Army?" Mathis paled. "That's not." "I was that woman," she said. "I gave the Army paths through the canyons, past the Apache war camps and outlaw dens. I watched my husband hang for telling the truth, and I buried my child with a spoon because you burned the doctor alive for helping me." Bell shifted his rifle nervously. "She's bluffing." "She's not," Bishop muttered. "She ain't." Evelyn raised her voice. "For 10 years, I've been helping your victims escape. I've renamed them, healed them, and sent them to places you can't spell. And tonight we finish it." Mathis stepped down from the jail porch, hand twitching near his gun. "You're gonna die, Rourke." "No," she said. "You are." The shot rang out from the livery roof. Bell crumpled, his shoulder torn open. A second shot followed. Lucinda Ray's pistol flew from her hand, skittering across the porch. Women shouted, moving into the square, weapons raised but fingers steady. It wasn't war, it was reckoning. Bishop tried to run, but was tackled by two ranch girls, who had once scrubbed Lucinda's floors. Miriam's chains fell loose as a girl from the compound found the keys and unlocked her. Tears streamed down Miriam's face as she turned and embraced Evelyn hard enough to shake. Mathis stood alone in the center of the square. Evelyn stepped forward, slowly, rifle lowered. "I could kill you," she said, voice low. "Then do it," he hissed, sweat pouring down his neck. She looked around at the women circling them now, their eyes wide and waiting. Some wanted blood, some wanted peace. Evelyn turned to Miriam, who nodded once. "No," Evelyn said. "You'll live, but you'll answer." By sunrise, Mathis and Bishop were shackled in their own jail. Lucinda Ray sat in the same cell where she used to send girls to be broken. Bell was gone, dragged west with a bullet in his leg and a note pinned to his chest. Let him live with it. The square was quiet again, but it didn't feel the same. In the silence, one could almost hear the echo of a girl's cry turning into something stronger. A voice, a vow, a wind that didn't belong to fear anymore. And in the hills beyond, where the rocks bled red at dusk, a network of trails waited, paths carved by someone who knew the land like a lover, who saw injustice and answered with patience, steel, and the quiet power of truth. Evelyn rode again at sunset, this time with others at her side. The dust rose behind them, not red from blood, but lit like fire from the morning to come. The morning came hard and gold over Dry Creek, the kind of light that burned away lies. Smoke hung low from torch lanterns, the square still echoing from the reckoning the night before. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Sheriff Mathis stood in the middle of the street, hand twitching near his pistol, a snarl rising beneath his breath. "This town belongs to law," he barked, the last shred of power cracking in his voice. Evelyn stepped forward, boots striking hard on the packed dirt. She wasn't alone. Miriam walked beside her now, jaw set, blood on her blouse not her own. Dozens of women fanned out behind them, shoulder to shoulder. Saloon girls, former maids, daughters, sisters. No longer afraid. "You don't speak for this town anymore," Evelyn said. "You only speak for yourself. And even that ends today." Mathis scoffed, spit dark into the dust. "You think you've won? This ain't a court. Ain't no jury of whores ever gonna hold me down." A sharp crack split the air. Mathis jerked, stumbled, then dropped to his knees screaming. Blood pooled beneath his thigh, soaking into the earth. He clutched at his leg, breath ragged, face pale with shock. From the shadows of the old blacksmith shop, the ranch hand stepped out, Caleb, the boy whose sister Evelyn had once saved. The rifle in his arms trembled slightly, smoke curling from the barrel. His jaw was clenched. "That's for Ruthie," he said, voice steady. Before Mathis could recover, Lucinda Ray lunged from the porch, pistol raised, eyes wild. But Evelyn was faster. One shot snapped the weapon clean from Lucinda's hand. It clattered to the ground, and the ex-madam dropped to her knees, sobbing more from rage than pain. Then chaos bloomed, brief, beautiful, and just. The women swarmed in, not with violence, but with rope and resolve. Bishop tried to bolt, but was tackled by two sisters he'd locked in the cellar 3 years past. Gunner Bell crawled to the saloon's back door and was dragged out by a cook with a butcher's knife. The same cook who'd once warned Evelyn in hushed tones. "They watch everything. Be careful." When it was done, Dry Creek stood still again, but something had shifted in its bones. A new quiet had taken root, the kind that comes after a storm breaks, when the air tastes clean and heavy with change. That afternoon, under the old cottonwood tree where Mathis once staged hangings, they held their tribunal. There were no robes or gavels, just a circle of people with long memories and no more tolerance for fear. Evelyn stood apart, arms crossed, saying nothing. She'd already spoken enough. This was their justice now. Each man and woman was given their voice. And then their sentence. Mathis and his deputies would live barely. Their days would be spent rebuilding the schoolhouse they'd let rot, repairing the homes they'd burned, and hauling stone for the well they'd poisoned with indifference. Under watch, every hour of labor would serve those they tried to destroy. Lucinda Ray was sent south, barefoot and alone, with only the clothes on her back and a message branded on her soul. Asterisk not forgotten. Not forgiven, asterisk. By dusk, the square emptied. The lantern stayed unlit. People sat on porches and listened to the wind, to the sound of a town remembering how to breathe again. At sunrise, Evelyn was gone. No one saw her leave. No horse was found missing. Only a note pinned to the door of Jonas's store, scrawled in a looping, dust-worn hand. Asterisk for every woman they broke, there's one who lived. And I'll ride till they're all free, asterisk. Beneath it, the old leather-bound ledger. Closed. Complete. Some say she died in the desert after that, buried under red rock and sun. Others swear she rides still, showing up in places where law forgets to look. One girl claimed she saw Evelyn in a cantina near El Paso, bandaging a wounded child's foot. A boy from Santa Fe says she once gave him a compass and a map before vanishing into the canyons. Me. I saw her once. Years later, riding south at dusk, just as the wind shifted and the dust turned gold. Her coat flapped behind her like wings, and her eyes never left the horizon. Justice rode with her that night, and I reckon it still does.